Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for another episode of Inside the Markets on the StockPulse network. And I'm really excited to be joined by someone who I've followed his work for about a decade now. And it's exciting to see many of the things that he wrote about back then actually playing out and happening now. So it's a real pleasure to welcome Gerald Celente from the Trends Research Institute to the show. And how are you doing today, my friend?
Everything is fine. Nice. We're getting ready for some snow, but other than that, it's okay.
Yeah, well, to dig in, again, it's amazing the things you've written about and how they're taking place now. So perhaps a quick overview of the market and what you're seeing, and especially, now we have things like petro-yuans, which in the past foreign leaders seemed to disappear when they were talking about doing things outside of the dollar. But like you've been writing about for quite a while, a lot of these things are happening now. So I'd love to get your take on where everything stands and what you've been looking at lately.
Well, what we've been looking at, some things you get right and some things you get wrong. But the things we usually get wrong are for two reasons. Is that, there's always the wild card, whether it's man-made or made by Mother Nature. And the other one is that tracking trends is an understanding of where we are, how we got here, to see where we're going. So, for example, when I identified the panic of '08 and took out the domain name in 2007, I could see this crash coming and the reasons why. What I got wrong was the big bounce in the stock markets.
Right.
And the reason I got that wrong, because they didn't teach me about zero interest rate, negative interest rate policy, and quantitative easing in Economics 101 or graduate school. So they weren't doing that before. They made this scam up. So that brings us to where we are today. We were the first to call the Trump rally in our magazine, The Trends Journal, back in 2016, 2 weeks after Trump got elected. We continued to say the rally would go on through 2017, and our forecast for 2018 was the end of the Trump rally. And then we said the markets would go into correction territory, which they did. The main reason being, Chris, is they're stopping the flow of cheap money. Beginning and end of story. All this BS about tariffs and trade wars and who likes who and who got caught with what, that's a lot of nonsense. Right. It's only about the slowdown of cheap money. Period, paragraph. We've been saying this since February. Now the markets are finally coming to realize it, and there'll be a big story in CNBC this week. Is the one thing that no one's talking about. The rising power of the dollar. What are you talking about? We've been talking about this for 7-8 months now. It's all about interest rates, but every day they keep coming up with trade and tariff wars. The Chinese economy is slowing down at all levels. It has nothing to do with trade and tariffs. Why aren't people buying? Why are car sales down 12% in China this month? It has nothing to do with tariffs. People aren't making the money they need to buy more stuff. Why have they demonstrations and riots in the streets in China where people bought apartments for a certain price and now the developers are selling them at lower prices and they're angry because they've got trying to sell this stuff. China dumping money in, lowering the reserve requirements, not working. Now they're saying they're going to do more. Look at the headlines. Today's Financial Times, slowdown in Germany. Check out the numbers. It just came out of Japan. Negative GDP growth. The whole global economy is slowing down. The cheap money scam is running out of juice. And we got this huge debt bubble that's ready to explode.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it, because I've been saying all year and writing that with interest rates going up, perhaps as simply as I can see it, the more the rates go up, the more likely these bubbles are to pop, and the sooner that is to happen. And we've seen that begin in the real estate market. It's interesting you mentioned Japan, where they have a negative interest rate. Europe has a negative interest rate. And certainly from the Austrian economic theory, once the rates go up, that's when the malinvestment and the excess is exposed. And it seems like we're seeing that play. It's not an accident that we're seeing the slowdown begin this year as rates continue to go up. And I wonder if Paul Volcker had to raise interest rates to 20% back in 1980, and now Trump is saying the Fed is raising rates too fast when they've hit 2%. I mean, I agree that as the rates go up is going to be a problem, but what do you see happening if they do continue to raise rates? How much higher of a rate do you think this market can withstand before we really see something like 2008 start to play out again?
Well, you mentioned it. It's real estate. And look what's going on. So that's a stage 1 recession when you're seeing the slowdown in new mortgage applications, home sales. Look what's going on in California, Southern California to Northern California. You see, the amount of new properties is rising, high double digits, and prices are softening, and sales are way down in many areas, and that's a hot area in
Right.
terms of sales. So the country can't take a 5%, 30-year mortgage, or 20% down. And so that's the signs to watch. They can't raise them. If we see mortgage rates at 6%, which is still a relatively low number in the old days, the markets won't be able to handle it.
Right.
And now there's something else that goes on with this, and this is very important. Our system of forecasting trends is called globalnomic, and it means making connections between different fields. So I mentioned, for example, what's going on in China. And now the reserve banks, the central bank, the People's Bank of China, has said they're going to do more to put more phony dough into the system to keep propping it up. We just saw the Chinese GDP numbers come out, the lowest numbers since 2009. And now there's estimates that they're going to see a 6% GDP rate, which is way low for them. They need growth to keep happening very fast to keep their society from revolting. So anyway, now they're going to dump more money into the system. All right, we were talking earlier about rising interest rates. What happens when interest rates go up? The dollar gets stronger. What happens to the other currencies? They get weaker. What happens when you're buying oil? Well, that's petrodollars, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
Take a country like India. 80% of their energy is imported, and the Indian rupee now is at an all-time low against the dollar. Yeah, oil prices are going down, but they still got to buy more with less currency. Now, then there's the other one. The $250 trillion worth of global debt that's been accumulated. And now you have all these currencies declining, and a lot of that debt is dollar-based. How are they going to pay it back? So this is what we're looking at. Should the Fed is, by all standards now, they're going to raise them again next month.
Right.
But will they raise them 3 more times in 2019? That's another story. Now, let's go back. You mentioned about the negative rates in the ECB, the European Central Bank's negative rate policy. They're talking about not raising rates maybe next summer.
Right.
And then you talked about China with their negative rates. A little story came out a couple of days ago. See if I can find it here. Here it is. Japan's economy has a $5 trillion problem. An epic bond buying spree by Japan's central bank means it's now sitting on assets worth more than the country's entire economy. This is total fraud, total incompetence, a total disgusting bankster scheme that's destroying the life of billions of people by a scheme that has enriched the very few. Because all this cheap dough has gone into boosting the equity markets, of which in the United States, 10% of the people have 90% of all the stocks. And for that other 10% that have them, they own on average of the grand total, with pensions and everything else, about $15,000 worth of stocks, with a 90% on average own about $360,000 worth.
Right.
So this whole thing is one big central bankster fraud.
I think that's well put. I didn't quite grasp that when I was still on Wall Street, and maybe it took a while to get away from that. But I think, like you said, it's really a fraud that has been carried on because it's been so secret, which again is why I appreciate folks like you really take the risk to speak out and help educate people about these things, where it's like if everyone was reading the Trends Journal research and knew what was going on, I wonder if that would even change it overnight, just because some of the stuff that when you actually get to the truth is so stunning. And one of the things I was curious to get your opinion on, it seems like the rest of the world is finally noticing, whether it's China developing an alternative to the petrodollar with their petro yuan. Obviously, I'm sure you saw how Russia just dumped their treasuries, and you see by the day different countries making arrangements to trade outside of the dollar. And I'm curious how you see that playing out, because it seems, again, I'm always amazed what it must have been like for folks like you who've been seeing this for decades, but now it seems like these things are actually happening and playing out. It's not just the theory anymore.
It's playing out, but it has to be put in perspective. And it goes back to the rising dollar and the declining currencies, particularly. I mean, look at the markets. You got the Shanghai, you got the Asian Pacific markets, you got the emerging markets. They're all in bear territory. So the stronger the dollar gets, the weaker these currencies go. And then when you look at the Forex and the exchanges each day, by far the dollar is the greatest of them all. Yes, this is going to take a toll on them, but the reason the dollar is strong is because the other ones are so weak.
Right, right.
So the importance of it, though, is to look at it long term. And once upon a time, back in the day, when those very proper English, when people say to me, Mr. Celente, you should lower your voice and stop being so angry and be proper like us, because we were the people where the sun never set on the British Empire, and we were murdering and slaughtering people all over the world, but we did it with such a proper tone. So, what happened to them? World War I. And all of a sudden, after World War I, when these murderous, slimy people couldn't destroy the rest of the world as they wanted to any longer, the pound started going down and the dollar replaced it.
Right.
That's what's going to happen should the United States continue on the path of the British Empire by fighting all these useless wars that the latest study just came out with that showed that the United States war on terror has cost over $6 trillion since 2001. And what is to show for it? Absolutely nothing other than costing the economy and murdering millions. So if the United States keeps following the path of Mother England, the same thing will start to happen to the dollar. So this is the beginning of the end of it, should it continue like this.
Yeah, and perhaps the last question for you today, I'm curious how you see this playing out. I mean, we have 21 trillion publicly stated debt. Estimates of the Social Security and Medicare usually start at another 100 trillion. There's that report from Dr. Mark Skidmore that the Department of Defense has 21 trillion of undocumented adjustments, let alone if they're going to raise interest rates, the increased interest expense that the U.S. is going to be paying on all this. And when I see Trump as president and remember his experience with bankruptcy, I wonder, I mean, the numbers are simple enough. At some point, it's not balancing. And we hear a lot about some sort of financial reset. I don't see how logically this gets resolved otherwise. So I'm curious, what do you see as the end game here, and how does it play out?
The end game is going to be a major global collapse, and then war. When all else fails, they take you to war. And it happens all the time. You want to get people's mind off their misery, make them more miserable.
Right.
And again, they just celebrated the war, the First World War, the Great War, the war to end all wars, right? The war is totally useless, started by madmen, as all the other ones have.
Right.
And anybody that knows anything about history knows that World War II is just a continuation of World War I, following the Treaty of Versailles being signed and the Germans warning the people that pushed it on them that more will follow, and it did. And now we have ongoing wars. Look, we just had the midterm elections in the United States. Not a word about the wars, the longest war in American history, the Afghan war, or a peep about peace. Not one. Right. From either the murderous Republicans and Democrats. I should say thieves as well, because they rob our money to give to too big to fails and their buddies, and they start wars based on lies, both parties. Right. So, or the sickness in their minds. I got to tell you, Chris, that guy Assad has to go. And I don't like that guy Gaddafi over there, I'll tell you. Don't like what he's doing to his people, folks. So let's destroy the richest country in Africa, where they had more rights than anybody. But it had nothing to do, of course, with Gaddafi wanting to change the currency into a gold standard. Yep. And sitting on the richest oil reserves around the area, where it only costs like 50 cents a barrel to pull out of the ground. No, it was their major export was broccoli, I thought. So what I'm saying is, you got a bunch of murderous, sick people that are destroying our nation and other nations with other sick people, and it just keeps going on. The cycle keeps going on. Whether it's a sick guy like Woodrow Wilson, who gave us the Federal Reserve, of course, and World War I, right, or other sick people like the Hitlers and the Mussolinis, and then you got the Bushes and the Obamas and the Clintons, all warmongers by their records. So people could see it, but they don't do anything. Name the country, and the people sit back and they let crazy people run and ruin their lives.
Yeah, which is, again, why I appreciate what you do and the material you publish, because, again, there are these problems out there, some of which can be a lot to handle. But in wrapping up, if you could let folks know where they can reach you and find out more about your work, because, again, I think it's great that you focus on helping people see what's happened and also the steps that they can take, because, yes, the problems are frustrating, but I think on some level it always comes down to how we respond. And again, you've been a great resource for that. So if you could just let folks know how they can find you and get a copy of the journal.
Well, the trendsjournal.com, trendsjournal.com, the only place you'll read history before it happens. It's a monthly. We put out trend alerts each week, do Trends in the News broadcasts Monday through Thursday, and plus other information. And also, we have launched occupypeace.com. It's the only peace program with an action plan for peace. Close the 800 bases in 80 countries, bring home the troops, secure the homeland, put them to work to rebuild our third world infrastructure, force Congress to vote to go to war, which they have not done since World War II, which is a violation of the Constitution, and to have referendums on each state ballot where we, the people, will tell these little slime balls called politicians what we want, not what they want. So we tell them how to vote and what we want, whether or not we want to go to war or not. So that's Occupy Peace, and anybody that wants to help, go to the website, occupypeace.com, because the time is, things are heating up in the Middle East. If the next war we have is going to be a war like we've never seen before. I was a keynote speaker at Virginia Military Institute talking about New Millennium Warfare. They say the generals are always fighting the last war, and boy, are they. All you have to do is look at this stupid defense budget and the crap that they're building that's obsolete. Yeah. Oh, yeah, an aircraft carrier costs $13 billion. chip, out of the sky in a flash. It's gone, man.
Yeah.
They're building this stuff for the military-industrial complex. That 5-star general, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, 2-term President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned the people of in his farewell address on January 20th, 1961, that the military-industrial complex was going to rob the nation of the genius of the scientists, the sweat of the laborers, and the future of the children. And here we are.
Well, Gerald, again, I appreciate all that you've done. I can confirm that just in the same way you're saying these things now, when I was first getting into gold and silver a decade ago, it's been incredible seeing what you reported then and how you were decades in advance of what's happening. So again, for folks, the Trends Research Institute, and it's Gerald Celente, you're doing a great service. And I think there's a lot of power when people have access to the truth, and then you can make decisions and plan around what's going on and continue leading your life. So I thank you, sir, for all you've done. Appreciate you making some time to join us on the show today, and look forward to following your work and staying in touch in the future.
Well, thank you for having me on. And to quote somebody who knew a thing or two about changing the direction into a more positive direction, it does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men and women. Samuel Adams.
Well, you've been a leader in that, and I certainly appreciate it. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll follow up with you soon.
Thank you, Chris.